Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance, and Cyber Effects Operations, Headquarters, United States Air Force, Lieutenant General Mary O'Brien.
Hey, good morning. Never easy to follow Chief Bass and Chief Toberman, but we've put together a great panel for you. Let me say thank you to AFA, especially for their flexibility due to some operational requirements that you're probably not surprised. All of my panel members that should be sitting in these chairs have gone virtual. Also thanks to our industry sponsors. And a special thank you to the commanders and chiefs that brought their airmen and guardians with them. I've had a lot of great conversations from some tech sergeants and captains who are really learning from this event. It is a rapidly changing and complex security environment. Our 2021 Interim National Security Strategy Guidance updated our U.S. defense strategy to focus primarily on strategic competition. And Secretary of Defense Austin went a step further and talked about leveraging integrated deterrence as a key component. As Secretary Kendall has said, war with China and Russia is not unimaginable. Our adversaries are employing the spectrum of instruments of power to reshape the world, proliferate authoritarianism, and advance their ambitions using methods that are provocative, dangerous, and destabilizing the sovereignty of nations, multilateral institutions, and our alliances and partnerships. The Ukraine-Russia crisis is the most obvious, but don't let that overshadow China's intentions towards Taiwan and their actions to destabilize freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. Just in the last year alone, we've accumulated an extensive list of examples of Russia and China employing cyber capabilities to conduct non-kinetic and information warfare campaigns against the US, our allies, and our partners. Countering these threats during the competition phase while setting conditions to deter and win in the high-end fight is underpinned by cyber ops and information warfare concepts. So this morning, we've got an outstanding panel to discuss one aspect of information warfare, the cyber perspective. As I mentioned, due to operational requirements, we have with us virtually the commander of 16th Air Force AF Cyber, Lieutenant General Tim Hawk, the commander of U.S. 10th Fleet Fleet Cyber, Vice Admiral Ross Myers, and the commander of the Cyber National Mission Force, Major General Joe Hartman. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us at AFA. As this crowd, you guys can't see it, but it is a Department of the Air Force focused crowd. I want to start first by asking our joint partners to briefly explain what their respective commands bring to the cyber fight. Can we start with Admiral Myers? Tell us about the 10th Fleet and Fleet Cyber perspective.
General O'Brien, thank you very much. It's great to be here with you and with all of primarily the Airmen of the United States Air Force and our joint partners. But first, let me start with Fleet Cyber is tasked as the Navy's lead for conducting cyber operations, space operations, and securing the Navy's global network of systems. So more than 14,000 Navy cyber, space, and network professionals and enablers manage offensive and defensive strategies to preserve decision-making space and freedom of action and freedom of maneuver for the nation, the Navy, our partners, while denying that same to our adversaries. Given the sustained expeditionary and distributed maritime capabilities of naval operations, and you'll hear me say distributed maritime operations more than once today, we support a global presence in every maritime theater of operation through full spectrum information warfare. In addition, operational commanders rely on Navy networks for command and control, battle space awareness, collaborative planning and integrated fires, and space domain awareness. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks. Major General Hartman, as a joint commander within U.S. Cyber Command, can you talk about the Cyber National Forces mission focus?
Yes, ma'am. First of all, thanks for having me here today. Really looking forward to having this discussion. The Cyber National Mission Force is a joint force made up of about 2,000 personnel from the Army, Navy, the Marine Corps, Air Force, Guardians, and Coast Guardsmen. You know, we are the force that on a daily basis is in direct contact with nation state adversaries and non-nation state adversaries that really threaten the national security of the United States. That's not just on the Department of Defense information networks, but also the defense industrial base and critical U.S. infrastructure. We're the away team, so we pursue the adversaries in foreign space so that they're unable to use those techniques or bring those techniques here to the homeland. You know, we say that the best offense is a good defense. We really go beyond domestic networks to proactively defend against these actors. We execute full spectrum operations, and so offensive operations, so the typical hacker on hacker type operations that everybody in this group would be familiar with. We execute defensive operations to include hunt forward operations. We've deployed teams globally over 27 times in the middle of a global pandemic to ensure that we can actively engage with our adversaries in foreign space. One, to reinforce our relationships with our partners and allies, but also to ensure that whatever our adversaries are doing in their near abroad, they can't do that back here in the United States. And then finally, cyber really is a team sport. It's just not about the Department of Defense or really the whole of government. You know, cyber is really a whole of nation activity. And for us, our partnerships across the government, specifically with the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigations, is absolutely critical. Our partnerships with private industry and the ability to share information relative to threats, not just to the department, but to the nation. And then we have relationships with literally dozens of like-minded allied nations that allow us to work together in order to defend the United States and our key allies and partners. Thank you.
Thanks. There's a real theme with the Allies in Partnership this conference. So thank you both for that rundown. Let's expand the context of the conversation. General Hawk, similar to Admiral Myers, you have a number of different hats. What advantages have you seen from having these authorities under a single commander, and specifically, how is this advantageous when operating in competition?
Thanks, General Bryan. I think first, in short, it's speed and agility. It's the ability to link across all the roles and missions, and then to be able to execute convergence to produce outcomes, whether those outcomes are in support of an air component, which is improved intelligence, or in support of combatant command, which may be cyber effects or information operations. Really proud of how our staff has come together to operate like a JTF, to be able to bring together our different roles and authorities around what the work our ISR enterprise is doing from a problem-centric perspective, to then be able to bring together increased partnerships, whether that be with service, cyber components, other components from the combatant commands we're linked with, but also our interagency authorities that Cyber Command brings, and how that can be now an enabler for outcomes in competition. We've seen that time and time again in our ability to link our ability to understand and generate insights with the ability to compete now through outcomes. And some of those outcomes may be in cyberspace, some may be through an improved intelligence product, and others are through an ally, partner, or interagency teammate that we've started accelerating our ability to produce outcomes. And I think that was what we were asked to do when we stood up 16th Air Force, and really proud of our airmen across all the roles and missions of how they've rapidly adapted and been able to accelerate outcomes in competition.
Thanks. I think the discussion of convergence is really powerful. That context, as you support EUCOM as well, I'd like to ask Admiral Myers, is that strategy adapting well across Indo-PACOM?
General Bryan, that's a great question, and it absolutely does. And what we're really taking a look at is the integrated deterrence and defense of our nation and partners is critical to today's environment. It's a force multiplier that maximizes distributed access, early warning, and appropriate responses that have a global reach. So it absolutely applies in the Indo-PACOM AOR. The sea services continue to invest in our relationship with the allies and partners. Again, you're hearing that theme, to advance our vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region composed of nations that adhere to the information and international rules-based order. We're engaged in a long-term strategic competition with China and Russia, and one that is not going to diminish in the next coming weeks or months. These states have expanded that competition to include persistent campaigns in and through cyberspace that pose long-term strategic risk to our nation, as well as our allies and partners. Our competitors are developing, testing, and deploying cyber activities as a means to reduce U.S. and allied military effectiveness and freedom to maneuver. I've said that multiple times in the Navy and in the sea domain. The freedom of maneuver is critical. One of the tactics that the Chinese are using right now is intellectual theft, of which the PRC is renowned, and the F-35 is a perfect example of it. China's eroding U.S. military overmatch in the nation's economic vitality by persistently exfiltrating sensitive information from the U.S. public and private sector institutions. So yes, what is applying, as General Hawk has described, it absolutely does apply for China. Thanks, Mary.
Great, thanks. General Hartman, how does the Cyber National Mission Force fit into this equation? Is there anything different about your organization and how it supports national objectives?
So, ma'am, the big difference for us is that, we work for General Nakasone, as the Cybercom commander to counter those threats that are really common across the globe. All right, and they're not just threats to the homeland; they're also threats to combatant commands and to like-minded nations and partnerships. But those threats transcend what would be the traditional boundaries of our geographic combatant commands. And so, we have the ability to pursue these adversaries, across the globe, but we do it in conjunction with General Hawk and the 16th Air Force team and his Joint Force Headquarters, and Admiral Meyer's team and their Joint Force Headquarters, and the cyberspace operation integrated planning elements that are physically present at our geographic combatant command headquarters. And so, because our adversaries, don't observe our geographic boundaries, and because our adversaries, tend to move as quickly as they can, our ability to pursue them globally is really, really important. And that's where we fit into this, right? We are laser focused on the threat and pursuing that threat globally, while also working very closely with partners here in the domestic space in order to ensure we do everything we can to defend the nation.
Great, thanks. Let's expand the conversation again a little bit more. In some past Air Force Association panels, we focused on information warfare as a concept for synchronizing and converging four specific information-centric capabilities: cyber, information ops, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and EMSO, and then public affairs and weather as supporting functions. Admiral Myers, does the Navy have a similar view of the application of information capabilities as a service?
Oh, General Bryan, absolutely. That's exactly the naval strategy. As an example, 10th Fleet was initially established during World War II to address the growing threat of enemy submarines by combining intelligence and operations into a unified command. The modern-day 10th Fleet integrates information warfare specialties to deliver information dominance over potential adversaries to counter today's global asymmetric threats, integrated to provide better opportunities to advance Navy's capacity and capability at the convergence of sea power and cyber power. So Fleet Cyber and 10th Fleet operationalizes cyber warfare to serve as the central operating authority for networks, cryptology, signals intelligence, information operations, cyber, electronic warfare, and space in support of the forces afloat and ashore. Cyber network professionals also enable a secure and interoperable naval network. Senior leaders at the command have experience across geographies and domains, including aviation, subsurface information warfare, network-centric, network security, meteorology, And the list goes on, so you can see that it applies to more than just information warfare. And it allows a hive mind that understands both emerging capability as well as fleet operations to provide executable options to the Chief of Naval Operations. We align in the messages and delivery across the physical and information environment, military actions, and political will to better reflect the nation's intent, as well as the combat misinformation. Thanks, Mary.
Great. It's always really nice to hear when we're on the same page. But let me ask General Hawk, have you experienced any differing viewpoints on the integration of information warfare capabilities?
Thanks, General Bryan. First, I think there are areas where we've seen a lot of commonality in terms of how air components and combatant commands are really looking to increase engagement in the information environment and an understanding of the threat that China poses. And really, SecAF talked about it yesterday, is what is that threat that China poses from a cybersecurity perspective to our mobility, to our logistics, to our networks. And we see that in our dialogue with air components. And that's a common thread. The area that we've also been working with air components is through a number of information warfare tabletop exercises of where we've started to lay out what is in the art of the possible in support of an air component. And really where we've started to see differences is time horizon and focus. So from a combatant command perspective, General Nakasone has really charged us with persistent engagement. How do we engage the gray zone elements of our adversaries that are trying to create advantage for their nation? And how do we create opportunities for our interagency and our allies to be able to slow that advance? And where we've talked to our air component partners, it's about how do they enable their dynamic force employment? How do they amplify their exercises with allies and partners to strengthen resolve as part of the areas that could be enabling for agile combat employment as we think about our partners and how we will work together in an area of crisis or conflict. So it's really been in the time horizon of really thinking about the long term in many cases from our air components, and then from the combatant commands, how do they use our overall force to be able to engage an adversary today in the information environment or in cyberspace that creates advantage.
Thanks. Let's pull the thread a little bit more, and I think all of you are going to want to answer this question. What are some of the leadership challenges that you're facing? Maybe it's a tug of war between institutional or your service requirements and the operational component mission, or there's a learning curve in understanding the information environment. Let's start with General Hawk, then go to Admiral Myers and General Hartman.
I think it's a great question, and one of the common themes is really understanding the threat. Clearly yesterday, SecAF articulated that threat, but understanding how all of us that have really been built on operations that occurred in the Middle East and the type of environment we operated in, and now going against and being focused on a pacing threat that has peer capabilities, that changes our dynamic in terms of threat. And so the area that we see is that we've got to be able to get that understanding of the threat to every airman and guardian so that they understand what that means to our operations in the information environment and in cyberspace. The other areas that we spend a significant amount of time is really being able to communicate what are almost the amazing things that our airmen are doing to operate our networks, and then ensuring that we're delivering the right service to every airman in terms of that quality that they're able to be able to do as part of a digital service. We want to be able to ensure that they get exactly what they deserve every single day as a digital Air Force. And I'm proud of the work our 688th Airmen do every day to operate our networks. But that is a challenge as we look to advance and make sure that we're providing the right class of service to every airman and guardian every single day.
Thanks. Admiral Myers.
General O'Brien, the Navy doesn't have any challenges. Okay, so maybe that was a little stretch of the truth. I would say that my only challenge is that I don't get to spend enough time with my good friend General Hockby, but I can take care of that virtually. But really, we'll take a look at it, and I'm certain that General Hawk would say the same thing as all the other services will, but I'll give you two of the main ones, talent management and readiness. So the Navy has a lot to be proud of in terms of our active duty and reserve cyber forces current forces in the tune with what's happening in the world around them, especially in the cyber and information space. They have great insights, make sound connections, and are prepared to collaborate and defend the networks. But like everyone else, I'm asking more and more of them. Retaining that top talent, it's a significant challenge, more so for the Navy than other services, because we do go to sea, and not everybody that's inclined in cyber is necessarily inclined to spend months at sea. Combined with the nationwide shortages of qualified cyber talent, we are in the constant battle to acquire and retain combat-ready force, because those that are extremely talented also can be seduced into the outside world by money. So onboarding, training, retaining are complementary parts of the challenge. The military cannot offer retention incentives comparable to private sectors, which means we must work that much harder to onboard and train. In terms of access to talent, we're all competing for the same talent pool. We need access to practitioners and trainers. And in this area where strong partnership with industry absolutely must be a priority. Retention is a long-term project. It's not something that's going to be solved today or tomorrow, requiring investment in terms of time, funding, expertise, and most importantly, senior level focus. Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, if I could say that yesterday, Dr. Schmidt talked about the great talent that he's receiving from the Air Force, but we'll assume he means from all of the services, and said his best employees are the cyber employees that are coming from DoD, and challenge us to find a better way to keep them in our service. But so let me give General Hartman a chance to answer that question as well.
Hey, ma'am, thank you. So for us, the primary leadership challenge is, how do we execute with speed, agility, and unity of effort that gets inside our adversary's decision cycle, right? And in order to do that, it takes talent, training, and teamwork. We've touched on the talent piece of this. Clearly, we're looking for joint service members, that have a significant amount of technical skills, but it's also those service members that have the right level of creativity and imagination to think about the future and ensure that we are continuing to advance the organization so that we are able to stay ahead of our adversaries. And technical ability is important, but it really is about the creativity and the imagination required to do that. And it's an individual skill piece, but it's also just from an organizational standpoint, our ability to create the right environment that allows that talent to be successful there. The training is really important. We, the Cyber National Mission Force, depend on the services in order to provide us trained and ready personnel to execute operations. From a service standpoint, that presents a certain baseline, but we are increasingly really discovering that there are advanced things like advanced malware analysis that we have to kind of organically train in order if we're going to continue to be successful. We don't want to meet some minimum standard, right? We want to have the best hackers in the world. We want to have the best network defenders in the world. We want to execute the most sophisticated information operations. And so getting from kind of basic qualification to world class is really the training piece that we focus a lot of effort on and will continue to be very important. And then finally, teamwork. We've all talked about teamwork, but I can't stress enough. Much of the real expertise when it comes to cybersecurity in the United States and globally is in the private industry. We've established programs where we can proactively work with private industry. If we're looking at an adversary that's executing operations and using US-based infrastructure, it's all about our great partners at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and our partners in the Department of Homeland Security. And then when we're talking about the next big things and big ideas, it's really about our relationships with academia and our ability to establish those relationships so we can have the conversations that we can understand and prepare to operate better in the future. Thanks, ma'am.
Great, thank you. You mentioned partnerships with industry, and one of the disadvantages that the three of you have by being virtual is you're not able to have the conversations that we've been having with our industry partners that have set up some demonstrations for us. And then part of that conversation, Secretary Kendall yesterday shared with industry his operational imperatives. And so if I could start with General Hawk, who is the operational lead for Operational Imperative 7, to talk about if you were here and had the chance to talk to our industry partners, what are some of the things that you would ask them to do to help with that partnership, starting with General Hawk?
So thanks, General Bryan. It starts with, there are areas as we look forward as a service, and what the Secretary and the Chief have laid out in the operational imperatives, for us in Operational Imperative 7, as we think about readiness and mobilization, is what does it look like against an adversary that is organized with cyber capabilities, with operations in the information environment, and how do we become more resilient? If we're going to generate air superiority in the future, it's going to come with cyber superiority and resilience in the information environment and being engaged. What we have asked of industry from an Air Force perspective is to help us become more cyber resilient quickly. And that's how do we censor our weapon systems? How do we get situational awareness of our networks and weapon systems across whether that's our business applications that are necessary for mobilization, all the way through every weapon system that would be engaged through mobility to the ability to execute whatever Indo-PACOM would need us to do. That's a key component, and being able to take those legacy weapon systems and bring them to a state where we have a clear understanding and situational awareness to defend those weapon systems. From a Space Force perspective, as part of OI7, we're really thinking about, they've started with a digital culture. Now, how do we build the training and exercise environment that allows them to integrate how they do defensive operations within cyber to ensure that we would have space capabilities for the nation? So those are two key areas we're asking of industry to be able to come back with their ideas of how we censor those weapon systems to ensure resiliency, and then also allow us to exercise together as airmen and guardians to be able to present to the joint force those capabilities that would be needed in crisis or conflict that will assure joint force success.
Great, thank you. Admiral Myers or General Hartman, would you like to share some thoughts about your partnership with industry?
General Bryan, thank you very much. And I'd like to build on what General Hawk gave there is two things first. General Nakasone is often quoted. Cyber is it's a team sport. It's also all about partnerships. So where General Hawk was going and could not concur more, resiliency. To me, it's the resiliency not only in the networks and the weapon systems, et cetera, the networks, it's also in our warriors, our sailors, our airmen, et cetera. We have to have resiliency, not only the networks, but it's also in the individuals. And then I would look to the partnership with industry as far as cybersecurity. When you take a look at so many of the vulnerabilities and so many of the exfiltration, they don't come in the hardened front door of DOD. They'll come in other softer doors, open doors. That's what we've got to take a look at. And that comes back to the partnership. It is a team sport, and it takes all of us, because the weakest, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Thank you. Joe?
Hey, ma'am. For us, you know, my big message to industry is share information with the United States government. We'll do something about it. Just plain and simply. You know, the same adversaries that threaten our defense industrial base, that threaten our critical infrastructure, those are the same adversaries that threaten the DODN, and those are the same adversaries that threaten our key allies. You know, share that information with whatever your inject is to the government. The government has gotten really, really good at broadly sharing across the whole of government. And one, if possible, we'll do something about that, but we'll also share back with you. And our ability to leverage our authorities and do things in foreign space that we can then bring back and share with private industry to really provide them additional insight into who might be executing operations can be really, really powerful. So again, a simple message, share with us, we'll take action, and we'll certainly share information back with you.
Great, thanks. Another comment that was made during this conference was that we have some senior leaders who came into the service and didn't have email addresses. And I'll share with you, General Brown's sitting in the front row, so I can see him. How do we get across this kind of generational gap of us senior leaders now who came into the Air Force when the cyber environment was very different, and now we're engaged in persistent engagement, hunt forward, other types of cyber operations. Give me some ideas on how we're closing that communication gap between the great airmen, guardians, sailors, Marines, and soldiers who are doing this work and the leaders that they're doing it for. We'll go in reverse order if you don't mind. General Hartman, you probably had an email address when you first came in. You can start.
Ma'am, I in fact did not have an email address when I first came in. So anyway, I take a little bit of, well, I'll get over it. You know, ma'am, we have to fight in the world we live in, not the one that we maybe remember from the past. And so, you know, it's the environment that we're in, and there is a lot of good information out there about how we need to operate. And all of us, particularly senior leaders, have a lot of really, really smart people around us. Okay, and at the end of the day, this is a little bit different paradigm where, you know, if you're the boss, you may be the boss, but you certainly might not be the smartest person about how you need to operate on a daily basis. And what we can't say is, hey, I'm in charge and I want it now. Okay, I was a young infantryman when I entered the Army without an email address. Okay, and we learned about things like the principles of patrolling. And the first principle was security, right? Until you had security, you couldn't do anything else. And so it all started with security, and that's the environment that we're still in. And from a network operation, it starts with security. Once your network is secure, you can then communicate those important things you need to, and you can make those decisions that as a senior leader you need to make. But if you are unclear on the security of your network, you shouldn't make any decisions, you shouldn't take any actions until your network is secure. And that's a little bit blunt, but that just is the way that we've always operated in the department. It's always been about security first, and that needs to be the way it is, even in the digital age. Over.
Admiral Myers, do you want to add anything?
Absolutely. Having only been in the Navy for 10 years, I don't know what the old dogs are talking about here. So actually, in truth and reality, the Navy was some of the last units to go ahead and go into the electronic age. When I came in the Navy, we were still doing letter mail. Email addresses didn't exist. So to transition to where now leading the fleet to where I guarantee you there are sailors that have never received a letter at sea. The only thing they've received are emails. And it is into the morale aspect of it, especially at sea. If you want to come close to a mutiny, cut off the internet connection, cut off to where you don't have any electronic means of communication whatsoever for more than a few hours, and offer no explanation for it. That's the culture that we live in, and it's not only a war fighting aspect to it, it's also our daily lives. It's harder for me, Joe's much younger than I am, so he's probably able to relate to him, but it's hard for me to relate to a 20-year-old that lives with an iPhone in their hand. That's their means of communication. It's not here, it is through the iPhone, and they live and breathe with that thing. They sleep with it. That is foreign to me, but it does not diminish the fact leadership is leadership. Whether it's electronic or whether it's physical, it still demands and requires all of us to be good leaders. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks. I think you bring a good point up on our families. When I was deploying to Afghanistan, my son said, "Mom, are you going to have Wi-Fi in Kabul so you can order my saxophone reeds and schedule my lacrosse camp?" And I said, "I would." He goes, "Okay, we'll be fine." So Tim, over to you.
So what I would add is that we have an obligation on our side from a cyber perspective. We have to be able to speak in plain language, and I've seen a great improvement in this, in that we're using common joint vernacular in the outcomes that can be produced defensively and offensively, so that we can have a conversation across all domains. And I've seen a great improvement in how we're doing that. We've also seen the other side, which is leaders learning, whether that's General Raymond learning how to code, to be able to show and demonstrate that, whether that's Chief Bass, who's out there talking about disinformation really routinely, about our airmen being able to spot and learn and identify what disinformation looks like. The next step for us is also to be, how do we mainstream the resiliency into our readiness? That this is something that's essential for our ability to counter a pacing threat, ensuring that every echelon of command, that we're able to understand the impacts of the cyber domain on our ability to operate within the air domain or within space, and making that part of our readiness criteria. That would accelerate us in a way that would allow us to ensure that we're presenting capabilities that our adversaries can't counter in the cyber domain.
Thanks. I really appreciate all the great insights in the conversation. You've made it evident why cyber and information warfare are vital to successful joint all-domain operations, whether that's competition, crisis like we see today, and conflict. Your airmen, guardians, sailors, soldier, Marines are getting the mission done every day. And so thanks to all of you for leading from the front. We've got about 5 minutes. I'd like to give each of you a chance to share some closing thoughts. We'll start with General Hartman.
Hey, ma'am, thanks. First, I really appreciate being on the panel today and the opportunity to talk to the airmen and guardians here. Really, my kind of closing message is kind of how I started, right? You know, the ability to defend the United States of America against our adversaries in and through cyberspace is really a whole of government responsibility. But our adversaries aren't 50 feet tall. All right, we can do this. And so the Cyber National Mission Force has an important mission, and we will continue to go out and pursue our adversaries in cyberspace. We will share information across the department and across the whole of government and private industry in order to do everything we can to make sure that the country's secure. But for everybody on here, we need to do our part, right? Update your iPhone, okay? Ensure your home computer is patched. Understand what sources of that you're using for information, all right? And if we all do our part on a daily basis to make the United States a difficult target while continuing to pursue our adversaries with speed, agility, and unity of effort, we and the nation will be successful. So thanks, ma'am.
Great, thank you. Admiral Myers.
Hey, General O'Brien, first let me say that I guarantee you the three of us would much rather be with you in Key West and the entire association. Oh, you're not in Key West, but you are in Florida. 27 degrees here at Fort Meade. So we would much rather be with you virtually than here with you physically there instead of here virtually. I will say that as General Hartman said, General Hawkins said, and what you're discussing at the symposium, it is a joint fight. Although it's primarily airmen there, it is a joint fight. You will not see, in my opinion, blue on blue, green on green anymore. It is going to be a joint fight all the way around. And the way we win in today's cyber fight is by being leaders in integration, innovation, and information sharing. The cyber fight involves all of us, military, industry, citizens, and exactly what General Hartman was saying, it takes all of us, and being vigilant and sharing information and the best practices to stay ahead of our adversaries. So thank you very much for allowing us to join you today. Greatly appreciate it. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks. General Hawk, the last words are yours.
Thank you. I think the one final thought would be partnership. We see such an opportunity, you know, as a component NAF in support of all air components and a component of the U.S. Cyber Command, for that partnership between our service and U.S. Cyber Command to meet what the chief has asked us to do in AFDP1 and in Agile Combat Employment, in terms of how we be able to move and advance our service in those things that are really unique to the Air Force and the Space Force, and how we operate in the air domain and the space domain, and General Nakasoni's increasing authorities and acquisition and funding within the cyber domain. And the opportunity to integrate and be able to produce outcomes for combatant commanders is really exciting. And those are areas that we see accelerating, and we see the ability to be able to meet that expectation in Agile Combat Employment, the ability to operate in disconnected environments in AFDP1, and Cyber Command being an enabler for our overall air components in what they're being asked to achieve. It's an exciting time for our airmen, and really proud of their leadership every single day.
Great. Thank you all. Really appreciate the time that you shared with us. Know that you have important jobs to do, and look forward to hearing about what all your airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines have done. When you feel free to share those types of stories, they will come out. Thank you.